Hello, and welcome to the Trustwave webinar, Adventures in Cybersecurity, Trustwave and Microsoft. I'm Doug Olenek, Digital Content Marketing Manager at Trustwave and your moderator. Joining us today is Dave Bragi, Trustwave's Senior Solutions Architect for Implementation Services and the winner of the 2023 Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award. Today, David will walk us through some of the areas covered in his ongoing SpiderLabs blog series, Adventures in Cybersecurity, the Defender series, which can be found on the SpiderLabs blog page. And then he's going to cover the basics of cyber defense topics, just some basic topics to go over. These are going to include operational technology security, cloud architecture, Microsoft security maturity, and zero trust easy wins. Now, before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Our webinar platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. You're able to expand the slides window and view all the different widgets below, such as the Q&A panel and the resource list. Feel free to adjust the size and positioning of the different windows. If you're having trouble with the webinar, please refresh your screen and the issue should be resolved. And after David finishes his discussion, we will have a question and answer period. If you have any questions, don't be shy and place them in the area provided on your screen. And lastly, today's presentation will be recorded and we will be sending a follow-up email to all attendees with a link to that recording. So with all of that said, let's get right to it. David, thanks for joining today.
Hey, Doug, how's it going?
Very well, very well. Looking forward to this.
I should update you. I'm proud to say I've received the MVP award for 2024. So
wonderful.
Take that comment.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we're just going to get into the slides, or did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, let's dive in.
All right. So yeah, the title here of the presentation is Adventures in Cybersecurity. And I could also add to that, it's the Defender series, since I'm more blue than red regarding cybersecurity defense. And there's just a few highlights here as to who I am. As we mentioned, I'm Microsoft MVP. I have several certifications in the cybersecurity side of Azure. And I was tasked by my boss to write a few blog posts for Trustwave SpiderLabs blog. And I figured, what can I do to make it a little bit more interesting? So I thought about a long list of security topics that are relevant to just cybersecurity in general. I have an architecture certification, so I was thinking in terms of architecture as well as implementation. And I thought I'd add a little backstory to the blogs to make it a little bit more interesting and be able to expand the results of the blog posts into an educational tool, which we'll be hosting on GitHub. It's already actually there, as you can see on the slides. There's a link to GitHub in SpiderLabs to see the blog posts once they've been published by SpiderLabs. They'll all be available there. In addition, I'll be adding labs to help reflect on the information related to the blog posts. And yeah, so there's a whole backstory and some fun things related to that you'll be able to see on the GitHub website. When you go to SpiderLabs, you're just going to see the blog posts. But when you go to GitHub, you'll have a deeper insight as to how the posts kind of tie together from an architecture, implementation, and operational perspective. So there's some interesting things to come with the blog posts.
And David is selling himself a bit short. There are 30 of these blog posts, not just a couple. David,
oh, did I say a couple? Yeah, there's 30 of them, and maybe more to come. But the idea here there was to cover off all of those different layers from whether you're an auditor, an architect for security, or an implementer of security tools, or just an operational, you're using them operationally. There's something there for everybody. So I'm really hoping to be able to, as a Microsoft MVP, I'm always looking for ways to give back to the community. And this, I thought, is something I could do for Trustwave, but also turn into a community tool as well. So down the road, it's going to be hopefully a lot of expansion on these blogs into practical labs and usage by the community. So in addition to just telling you about that, I'm not going to go into every blog post. We're just going to pick a few topics to talk about, and I'm going to ask Doug to ask us questions on these 4 topics, and then I'll give my responses, which will be shown as well on the slides. So let's go to the next page, and we'll talk about operational technology security. Oh, sorry, this was the highlight of what I just mentioned about the blog posts, how they have details about architecture security frameworks, and there'll be education and community related topics as well. Okay, into the topics now. Operational technology security is the first one. So go ahead, Doug.
All right, here we go. So David, what is OT security and what are some of the things to look for when considering this security defense architecture?
Right, so you may have heard the terms IoT security as well as OT security. So OT relates, IoT is Internet of Things. OT is operational technology. So think in terms of a factory. You've got a factory, maybe a bunch of robots or other types of equipment that are hooked up to a network. It could be susceptible to attacks by somebody with malicious intent. And the problem with a lot of operational technology equipment is it can be very old. We could be running very old versions of Windows or Linux or anything. And it could be very expensive to not only upgrade but to change the software firmware on those equipment. So there is OT-related security tools that you can have to monitor your factory. And usually we think about OT security in terms of passive versus active capabilities. So because a lot of this equipment is old, we want to be very careful about actively connecting to that equipment and monitoring it in a way that could upset the code. So passive is a very common way. We'll just sniff the network, in other words. So we'll attach to a switch, sniff the network, and watch the traffic to and from that equipment to see if it goes outside of the baseline that's expected. So in addition to how we think about the operation, passive versus active, where we're actually communicating with it, we think about it in terms of ease of deployment. So we want to have a simple way to deploy OT security. So because it could be in one factory, it could be in 10 different factories, and we don't want to have a lot of complexities on troubleshooting and monitoring that equipment. So it has to be really simple to deploy. And then we have to think about in terms of hardware support. So, is it something, these sensors that we're going to hook up, are they going to run in a VM? Is there hardware we can buy off the shelf and plug in that's very reliable? So those are just a few pointers about OT security. Moving on to the next topic.
All right. What are your thoughts around cloud security architectures, and could you give some key topics to consider for cyber defense architectures?
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, cloud security architecture, because a lot of people don't even think about it. They're told by their boss, hey, we got to power up a VM, put it in the cloud, and just get things working. And they don't really think about architecture. They just think, we got to get a job done. Let's get it done in the simplest way possible. And that can cause a lot of problems when you start growing and evolving into the cloud if you're not thinking about architecture. There's some really good documentation by not just Microsoft, by Google, by AWS that allows really good methodology on architecture for the cloud. And two common acronyms are the WAF, or Well Architected Framework, as well as CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework. So cloud adoption, you're moving from on-prem to the cloud. So there's some specific things you might need to think about there. For example, regarding specific workloads, I have a database, I have, an application. How do I move that from on-prem to the cloud? And well-architected framework is more about, I'm in the cloud. How do I think about expanding the cloud, or starting with these, maybe they call it landing zones, and then growing from that platform in a way that's more cookie cutter, more easy to manage. So yeah, the really good terminology, worth just taking a look at those acronyms and Googling them and seeing what comes up regarding security architecture. Oh, next.
Okay. So how would you go about evaluating and improving an organization's cyber defenses?
Right. So again, thinking from the architecture perspective, I always think in terms of a framework. So you may have heard the term a lot with framework, maybe even architecture used in parallel with each other, but I think maybe I'm just grew up on Lego and I like to think about building blocks, but I like the idea of frameworks. So, pick a topic in cybersecurity, try to develop a simple framework around that topic, whether it's, SIM or EDR or, in general, the cloud. Think about a framework. There's a lot of times there's already a developed framework, or you may have to make it up your own. And then once you've got those building blocks, then take a look at your environment and see, okay, how does my environment map to the requirements of this framework? Are there gaps? Okay, I've got this, but I need these pieces. And then you focus on the gaps within that framework. And then you look at implementing new cyber defenses based on the gap requirements, and just start simple and work towards complex. So you don't have to get a 500 license for something. You might want to just start with 5 or 10 licenses for whatever you need. Get your team up to speed, understand the process procedures for implementing that technology, and then expand out from there. Next.
Oh, okay. What is zero trust, and can you give some example security technologies for employing zero trust?
Right. So zero trust is, again, we were just talking about frameworks, and zero trust is arguably a framework. So it's a security defense related framework. And it really breaks down to only about 6 top level components. Again, when you think about it as a framework, as building blocks, here are your 6 blocks. So you've got identity protection, and an example of that is your multi-factor authentication. Or in the case of Azure, you have Azure Entra ID. In terms of device security, we're thinking about the endpoints or the servers. That's your device security, and that's your endpoint detection and response, or EDR. Network segmentation. So back in the day, we used to think about our network as a house of cards, because if you break one thing, everything breaks. So network segmentation is a good way to prevent that. And then network security groups is an example of that within the cloud. Continuous monitoring is collecting all of your logs into a central location, and then SIM is the solution for that. Data protection is all the data we've got in our databases or file systems everywhere, and how do we protect that? And an example of that is DLP, or that stands for data loss prevention or protection. And then finally, automation. So being able to take as much of this security, overwhelming amounts of security protections we have, and automated the pieces that are possible. That's SOAR, and that's just an acronym for the automation of operations and security.
All right, great. Thanks for going through that, David. We're going to hop to the questions in a minute. I do want to give one more quick PSA, though, for David's blogs. We've been posting them every Monday on the Trustwave blog site. So when you get the replay, you can go back to the QR code, I believe, right, that you had on the other slide, and get to it, or to the GitHub repository.
Yeah, well, there was a link on the first page to the GitHub repository, and within there's links back to the SpiderLab blogs for the ones that have been posted, and then there's entry lines in the table of contents for the ones that are still to be posted.
Okay. And you also had mentioned, and you brought me up to date too, that you received the Microsoft MVP for 2024 as well. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about what that is and what it means for Trustwave and how we deal with clients?
Yeah, it's actually a personal great honor. So what I do is I contribute as much as I possibly can to the community by posting blogs and responding to a lot of the Microsoft Q&A forum. I assist over there. I present at Microsoft places such as Ignite. I attend what's called the Microsoft MVP conference to meet with other MVPs and share information. But it really is an honor because it shows that I've been recognized as sharing with the community a lot regarding my knowledge in cybersecurity.
Excellent. All right, so we do have some audience questions, and just as a reminder, if you haven't put a question in yet, please do so. If we are unable to get to it, we will answer it via email after the the webinar is over. So the first question is, what is the most overlooked aspect of OT security? And are there any like low-hanging fruit procedures a company can quickly implement to either take care of those or just in general?
Yeah, a lot of people like a lot of our cybersecurity defense tools that are out there, from all vendors. Uh, Companies tend to overcomplicate things and think, okay, we have to really plan this out, and sometimes that's justifiable, right? But sometimes the hardest part is just getting started. But once you get started and being able to simplify the procedure and get those sensors out there, it's not really an overlooked thing. I would say from the overlooked side, it's maybe digging a little bit deeper into the feature functions of OT and exactly what is required specifically for that company. An example is you can have sensors that are active versus passive, as we mentioned. And for most companies, all they need is passive. So that might be good enough. They might be overthinking some of the feature functions required. The other one is, okay, we've got this tool. Can it feed up to the cloud, and can it share its information with other security tools such as SIM? So, understanding the feature functions of the sensor, sometimes features get overlooked, or sometimes we're looking at an old technology versus a new one.
Okay. Do have a couple more actually questions here. Could you go a little bit further into the zero trust topic that you were talking about? Is it easy to implement if you don't have it at all, if you're starting from ground zero?
Yeah, so there's a sneaky way of dealing with zero trust. You can call in an auditor and you can go through a very long process of doing your checks and balances, but often the security tools you already may own may include a lot of zero trust capabilities. An example of that is your cloud security posture management. So in the case of Azure, it's Defender for Cloud. It may already have built-in compliance capabilities that may map to zero trust. The same thing with your SIM in the case of, again, Azure, Microsoft Sentinel. There's capabilities, there's reports built in for zero trust to give you guidance. Also, a lot of the capabilities of zero trust map to existing compliances. So if you're able to map the requirements within zero trust to another compliance control, you might be able to get a lot of value from that way. So take a look at your existing tools, see if there's already capabilities there that will allow you to help guide and provide recommendations on zero trust.
One more here. When it comes to cloud architecture, are there any like basic issues that you're noticing companies having trouble with when they're trying to implement, like you were saying, WAF or with the other ones? Is there any major stumbling blocks, it seems the person's trying to ask?
Yeah, the biggest one is just time. Giving your administrators time to learn and practice best practices. So, just being able to throwing ideas or recommendations at an administrator doesn't help. They need time to be able to build and adopt those types of frameworks and practices, and then get buy-in and support from their managers, from their CISOs to say, we're going to do things this way. This is the process procedure we're going to do. We're going to follow these best practices. And our team is now experienced in doing it that way. It's just a matter of time, and education is the biggest challenge.
Okay. And our last question is going to be, has to do with cloud security. What roles do shared responsibilities play in cloud security, and how should an organization approach this with their cloud service providers?
Right. So when you're dealing with vendors, it's very often a case of we need extra bodies to manage these services. So we have to work with our vendors, and we have to be able to coordinate and ensure that we're monitoring and protecting our resources from these vendors, and in a way that's going to not just work today, but also evolve tomorrow in case we change vendors. So building the process procedures needed to allow these vendors access, and then having a repeatable process of being able to allow them to connect and be able to monitor their services and their actions is really important. So in the case, for example, within Azure, again, I'll just say within Azure Intra, you have the capability of access reviews. So being able to monitor those capabilities. In addition, you may have things like Entra, internet access or private access, that you can give services to the vendors or to your users to say, you're only allowed to get to these things that I authenticate you to. So really thinking about identity and the resources that are the people are being attached to, providing workload protections for those resources is a lot to think about, but it's an important task in that topic.
All right. Okay, I think with that answer, we've asked you all the questions we could possibly ask for one day. So we'll wrap things up here. I do want to thank David for giving us his time and his knowledge on these topics. And of course, a big thanks to everyone who took time out of their day to join us today. So with that, we're going to wrap this up, and we do hope to see you at another Trustwave webinar in the near future. Thank you.